Well, anyone joining now is only going to miss my introduction. And we have much to cover. Why don't we begin? My name is Alan Shark, and I am the co-chair of the Standing Panel on Technology Leadership. And I share that with Teresa Pardo, who is with us today. We've been working since 2017 and we've devoted considerable attention focusing on artificial intelligence and data. And yes, we've covered other areas, but nothing is as impactful as artificial intelligence and the new technologies. They're truly a game changer. But for AI to be successful, it requires quality data. So I think we all recognize that democracy can exist without an educated citizenry. When we go to the store, we can readily see what items are missing from the shelves. Today, our federal websites appear quite normal. You wouldn't even know if you weren't normally looking for certain things. But unlike the example of items on a store's shelf, most of us fail to notice what is missing, deleted, hidden, or worse, altered to conform to a political narrative. There are those who actively rally against science and replace key concepts with terms like it's only common sense. And as we all know, one person's common sense may be indeed be uncommon to another. During the COVID pandemic, hundreds of thousands died from misinformation. In the US, we often hear from some that global warming or climate change is a hoax. We worry about books being banned at our public and private libraries, including military institutions. We also worry about critical missing data sets. This is what brings us together today. Both Teresa and I were basically honored and privileged to nominate our host today, Jill Gurin, for consideration as a NAPA Academy Fellow. And we're delighted to say that he's been a fellow of the Academy for the last couple of years. At a recent think tank event, Joe and I discussed our fears about what's going on regarding federal data, which quickly led to this event. He is the founder, executive director, Center for the Open Data Enterprise. I should note that Teresa is also a board member of this prestigious organization. Joel has an incredible record of public service, and in particular, a focus on not only collecting data, but making data understandable to the general public. So we couldn't think of a better host to be the moderator of this important discussion. So I'm now going to sit back and have the luxury of listening to a great discussion. Joel, it's yours.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Alan, and really, really honored to be part of NAPA and to have a chance to moderate with this incredible, really extraordinary panel. Just so honored that you all are here and able to have this discussion. As Alan mentioned, I'm the president of Center for Open Data Enterprise. We go by CODE for short. Paul Kuhn from the center is also here and will be helping to manage this webinar. And I thought I would just start just before we get into what's going to be an amazing discussion, just to give a little bit of perspective on our perspective of what's happening now. So I founded the Center for Open Data Enterprise with a small team back in 2015 with a mission to harness the power of open data for public good. That's been our mission for the last 10 years, as it has been for an awful lot of people who have been working in this open data movement. And I think what we're seeing now is just a real unprecedented sea change in how we think about open data and how we think about the challenges we have. I mean, for many, many years, we've been very focused on the tremendous data resources that the federal government has, more than 300,000 data sets by last count, if you go to data.gov. And the challenge has always been, how do we take this wealth of data and make it more useful, make it more accessible, put it to use for the public good? And now, all of a sudden, we're facing a situation where that data may not be there. As Alan said, we're seeing websites taken down, data sets taken down. We're seeing potential changes in data collections, particularly around issues like sexual orientation, gender identity, race, and ethnicity. And we're seeing, massively disruptive cuts to the organizations and agencies that collect really critical federal data sets, as well as cuts to research funders like NIH and NSF that produce more and more data that will become more and more available under open science principles. So we're really at a very critical point. I think there may be a way in which this could be an area of opportunity to rethink some data collections that we've had for a long time. But I think whatever your thoughts are about that, we can all agree that what we're seeing now is absolutely unprecedented and really merits this kind of discussion and this kind of attention. I do want to mention before we get started that chat is open to everybody. We encourage you to post thoughts and questions in chat. This can be anything from if you have a resource or a website or URL that you think would be good to share, please add that. And also, of course, if you have questions for the panel, you can put those in chat at any time, and we will get to those towards the end of this discussion. So let's get started. First, I'm very pleased to introduce just a remarkable panel that we have here today. Denise Ross, who served as the U.S. Chief Data Scientist in the Biden White House. She has been working with federal data for nearly 25 years and just has extraordinary depth of knowledge and expertise in this area. Meeta Anand is the Senior Director of Census and Data Equity for the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and the Leadership Conference Education Fund. She's also worked with the New York Immigration Coalition, has extensive experience in advocacy, strategic planning, and community management, and a JD from Harvard Law School and a master's degree from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. And Steve Pearson has been Director of Science Policy with the American Statistical Association since 2008. Previously, he was head of government relations for the American Physical Society and associate professor of physics at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. So delighted to have you all here, and thank you so much for joining. So I am going to start with a really broad opening question that I'll like each of you to address. What are you seeing as the biggest risks to government data today, and what worries you the most? And maybe Denise, we could start with you and then go to Meeta and Steve.
Sure. Thank you, Joel, and thank you, Alan, and huge thanks to NAPA for hosting this important conversation. I'm seeing two main ways that federal data are at risk. The first is probably the most visible, and that is the targeted removal of data that are inconsistent with the administration's priorities. That includes data about climate, environmental justice, DEI, and gender identity. A few examples that we've seen so far include OPM's published data on federal employment no longer includes breakdowns by race and ethnicity. The Bureau of Prisons and the Department of Justice no longer publishes data on the number of transgender people in their custody. Field surveyors for the National Crime Victimization Survey have been instructed to skip questions related to gender identity. And just last week, NOAA announced that they are discontinuing the $1 billion weather and climate disasters website. So those are the sort of the targeted cuts. The second way that we're seeing federal data are at risk is less targeted, but in the end, I think will end up being more harmful and difficult to recover from. This includes things that we've seen in the news, like reductions in federal workforce. We're losing a lot of institutional knowledge and deep expertise in data and statistics, as well as the essential frontline people who are in the field conducting surveys. The cutting of contracts that enable data collection and processing, as well as the technologies that ensure privacy and security of collected data. Cutting of collections themselves. You may have seen yesterday a tweet from DOGE that mentioned that they were taking a pass through the surveys conducted by the census and have already identified 5 that they want to cut. This seems to be with the stated goal of saving dollars. And there's also the disbanding of the scientific advisory boards that provide free expertise for our most important data collections. And then less visible are the bureaucratic inefficiencies that are getting in the way of just conducting the business of data in government, including failure to sign contracts or MOUs between agencies that need to collaborate on important data products, the bottlenecking of routine approvals that now have to get signed off by political appointees, and so on. So there's just a lot more red tape to conduct the basic functions of data collection and publishing, and fewer resources inside of agencies to do the work. So that's a broad overview, and I know that Meeta and Steve will be able to add a lot more detail on the risks that they're seeing.
Thank you, Denise. And I just have a thought, Meeta, just before we go on to you, and Denise, just to add a little bit of context to, I think, that kind of remarkable overview of that you just gave us. You have a terrific perspective because you worked in government for many years, and you really have a perspective not going back to the Obama administration, as well as President Trump's first term, President Biden's term, and now what we're seeing now. And I wonder, just as part of this stage setting, if you could give us a very brief kind of take on how you've seen the kind of evolution or the differences from Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump.
Happy to.
Thank you.
So with Obama, which is I think where you and I met, Joel, that was all about open data, including the Open Government Directive and the launch of data.gov. This work was inspirational for me when I was at the city of New Orleans under Mayor Mitch Landrieu, and I launched the city's first open data initiative. And then I joined federal government working on open data related to disasters, policing, and community development. So Obama was all about open data. The first Trump administration, those data efforts were exemplified by the signing of the Evidence Act in 2018, which included the Open Government Data Act, and established chief data officers for every agency, and a push to turn data into evidence that it could improve government policymaking. Under Biden, we really built on the capacity established in the previous two administrations with a focus on disaggregated data to drive better outcomes for all Americans. This included improving the standard race and ethnicity categories, which hadn't been updated in 25 years, advancing best practices for collecting data on sexual orientation and gender identity, as well as disability. And the Biden administration also focused on disaggregating data by other characteristics, such as rural versus urban, veterans, military spouses, caregivers, and survivors, et cetera. And in its commitment to environmental justice, the Biden administration advanced the idea of how we combine data on climate and environment with demographic data to better understand which communities are being overburdened and underserved. So that was the Biden administration, mostly about disaggregated data. And then, 100 plus days into the next Trump administration, what we're seeing are two main areas of action on data. The first is breaking down information silos, for better or worse, to create a master file on all residents, reducing the barriers and safeguards for sharing data across agencies and levels of government. And secondly, we're seeing significant reductions, as I talked about before, in the federal government's capacity to collect and publish data. For example, the Data Foundation recently reported that many of those chief data officer roles that were established by the first Trump administration are now vacant. So that's a quick overview of federal data across the last four administrations, but I'm glad you asked.
No, thank you very much, Denise. And I think it's really valuable. And I think it's also really important to put this current moment in context, that the evolution of open data and support for open data is something that has really been consistent in different ways across the last three administrations, including President Trump's first administration. And what we're seeing now, I think, is just qualitatively very, very different. But thank you. Mita, sorry to keep you waiting, but I would love to hear your answer. What are you seeing as the biggest risks to government data, and what worries you the most today?
I am always happy to wait if I'm benefiting from the knowledge of Denise. Firstly, I have to echo Denise's words. It's truly a great pleasure and honor to be here, to be able to speak with this group. I hope I am able to live up to those glowing words of introduction. So I'm going to be a bit depressing, because I would say that what I'm seeing is +1 to everything Denise said, and my two big ands are declining public trust, the deep erosion of public trust. And we can see how that is playing out. The IRS ICE data share is chilling and will have a chilling effect on responses to surveys, which I'm sure many people already know. We've been seeing declining response rates on surveys. And when you see that share, that will decline, that will have the chilling effect on response rates as well. And this is in the context of DOGE, which we already mentioned, where we heard so many stories of DOGE going into agencies and sucking up data and grabbing personal data. So you're now in a situation where people are going to be worried that any data they share with the government will not be used for their benefit. It won't be public data for the public good, but it instead be used for targeting, to weaponize, for enforcement, which were not the initial purposes for which these data were collected. So what does that do? And that feeds into my second point. Who does this most impact? Those members of our community that are already the most marginalized, the most underserved, the most underrepresented are the ones that are going to feel that chill the most and not wanting to respond to government surveys. What does that lead to? That leads to inaccurate and incomplete data sets on which people are basing decisions. So my title is Senior Director of Census and Data Equity, so I will go to the census. We use the decennial census as a denominator on many levels, and we use the American Community Survey run by the Census Bureau as a frame for many other government data collections and for researchers, right? And for states. If we start seeing those data sets be skewed with a lack of representation of communities of color, of rural communities, of communities with disabilities, you can, I can go down this line. I'm sorry, when I was naming threats, right, that autism database we heard about briefly, like that is so scary and so chilling. So it's all these communities that people like Denise and I worry about and want to make sure are represented in data sets in order that proper decisions can be made and that we can truly understand the ground truth of our society. When we start seeing the data sets being less complete, less accurate, more skewed, to me, that's really scary. That's the threat, because then you're going to see that misallocation of resources, that misallocation of representation, and the ability to tell a story that is not reflective of what's the actual conditions that we're experiencing in our society.
Great. Mita, thank you so much. And I think you've really sort of tied together, why this real moment in terms of what's happening to American data is not an abstract concern, but is something that's really going to affect people very directly. Thank you. Steve, I think that's a great segue to you. Very interested in your biggest concerns and also maybe addressing some of the points Mita raised about, what happens. Do you think this will lead to decreased trust, lower census participation, and other impacts, particularly for statistical agencies?
Thank you, Joel. And thank you, Alan and NAPA, for inviting me. I'm honored to be here and appreciate all of the attendees with interest in this topic. So, plus one to all that Denise and Mita said. Let me just specify that I'm going to speak only to the federal statistical agencies, where we've been focusing our work for the last several years. And for me, the benchmarks of, do the data remain available? Do they remain objective? And do they remain credible? But also, do the agencies remain trustworthy, which is what Mita spoke to. And I first want to just mention a report that we issued last summer called The Nation's Data at Risk. And the point is that these agencies were already at risk. And so in that precarious position, it makes what we're seeing now all the more impactful. And that URL will go into the chat shortly, so I won't dwell there. So in terms of availability, objectivity, and credibility, we've already heard about the data removal, the data resources removal, the scrubbing. We're hearing about the staffing cuts. And so in terms of the work being undermined on the staffing cuts, I just want to emphasize that the work of the Federal Statistical Agency is hugely person-intensive, expertise intensive, and also experience intensive. And so these losing people most likely means we're going to lose more products. Just last week, BLS announced cuts to many of their producer price indices. So I think we are going to see more cuts. We're not sure yet about budget. It looks like some of them will be flat funding, but we also haven't seen the FY26 request. The contracts and the interagency agreements, those are coming down. So the work is being undermined. We're losing some of this availability on the future. we've already spoke to the some of the objectivity, but one of the things I'll just highlight, since the comments are due tomorrow, in the administration's push to make I guess they're calling them policy influencing positions at will. If that were to hit the federal system agencies, that would undermine the trust. That would undermine, it could undermine the objectivity. That if federal system agency folks could be fired by the administration, that is both a lever at which you could try to improperly influence the data, but it also, raises questions about the objectivity of the data. So so we're worried about that, and Mita already spoke to the trust. And Joel, on your question, are we seeing anything yet? I haven't seen anything yet. That's something certainly that people are watching. In terms of what of those risks that we're seeing, of which I've named many, and as have Denise and Mita. One of my big worries is just that government statistics are a public good, right? So they're supported by all, but not championed by many. So what if these things disappear? Will we get new champions? Will people speak up? And so, if there's not an uproar around some of these really important products, that worries me. So I'm trying to prompt you all to help be part of the conveying the importance of these and what's lost and how government becomes less efficient without them.
Right.
And then lastly, I just want to mention our current phase of our project. Last summer was our inaugural report on the healthy agencies, and we're now doing somewhat real-time monitoring. As we're hearing about things, we're posting these to a website, and that URL will come up shortly, and you can sign up for updates, monthly updates, which will also be in the link. And if you connect with me on LinkedIn, we're doing mostly weekly updates on what we're seeing from that website. So back to you, Joel.
Great, Steve. Thank you. Thank you so much. Great overview. In the interest of recruiting more champions, I wonder if you could speak just for a minute or two about the U.S. Statistical system. I mean, we have a somewhat unusual structure here in the U.S. We don't have a national statistical office, although we do have a chief statistician. Statistical agencies, statistics are collected by, I think in your report, 13 main agencies in the federal government. I wonder if you could just give a little bit of a sense of what some of the most important collections are so that everybody has a sense of how these statistical collections are managed and what impact they have on folks.
Well, I'm not going to say which are most important, but
Sorry, that was a terrible question. Go in alphabetical order.
Trying to set me up, but yes, there are 13.
Come on, Steve, give us your favorite child. Come on.
It's a highly decentralized system, kind of by just happenstance of a history in our government that, as a new agency or department is created, they might add a new statistical agency. So there are around 100 entities around the federal government that produce official statistics. 13 are the major one. There are 13 major ones. So census, BLS, and then of course Ag and Justice and Energy. And then there are 3 units. And I understand that 2 of these are essentially eliminated as well. And then there are many statistical officials, I think another 13. So all of that is part of, 29 of those, I think, are part of the Interagency Council on Statistical Policy that is overseen by the chief statistician, an OMB position that works to not only, review all of the collections and set standards, but also to coordinate and provide efficiencies. And so I think that covers the first part of your question generally. Obviously, you could go into several hours on the structure.
I know it's asking for a short answer to a very big question.
Good.
But thank you. I think just to give people a sense that, these statistical collections, cover just about everything about American life and are important for so much decision making. Before we go on, Mita, I want to ask you particularly about your work on census. I just wanted to say 2 things quickly before I do. One is I neglected to mention at the very beginning, there was a little bit of conflicting calendar information for this webinar. So I want to just let you all know that we are actually ending at 3 o'clock. Some of the information I think said 3:30. So we are going to keep it tight, and we'll let you get on to whatever you need to do in the next hour after 3. Also want to just say I'm delighted to see incredible dialogue happening on chat. Please keep it going, and I think we meaning both Code and NAPA, will want to follow up on this panel. There may be future panels. We're doing some writing at Code to try to get a handle on this whole topic. Everything that you're putting in chat will be helpful not only for the moment and for the Q&A at the end, but also for what we draw out of this panel discussion later on. So thank you for that. So now, Mita, to you. You know, census, I think we've just been talking about the statistical agencies. Census is, I don't know if we would call it the favorite child, but certainly the statistical collection that I think most people are most familiar with. You're the senior director for census and data equity at the Leadership Conference. Could you please tell us a little bit about why census data is so important to the mission of the Leadership Conference and the kinds of issues that you're concerned about as in census data going forward?
Sure, happy to do so. I touched on this a bit in my opening remarks. We have long viewed the collection of fair and accurate census data to be a civil rights issue. And there are 3 reasons why. And I think most people by this point, hopefully census education campaigns through the years have proven this point with respect to the decennial census and the American Community Survey. But representation, it is about like how we allocate the, apportion the number of representatives each state has, and then it goes to redistricting. And just moving to redistricting right now, you can see litigation is still ongoing in states like Louisiana and Alabama to ensure that these districts are giving proper representation to the underlying population. Number 2, it's about resource allocation. And there it's about, how federal funds are allocated, which are often based on formula that are based on underlying population. Sometimes it's a binary on-off switch, but in general, there is some aspect where you're looking at the quantity of people in a community to determine the needs and the amount of federal funds. Thirdly, it's about civil rights enforcement. And so there we're looking at things like the Voting Rights Act. We're looking at employment discrimination. We're looking at housing discrimination. These are all dependent on having fair and accurate underlying data. Now, what we have following the 2020 census as an example, we saw an undercount of 3%, I believe, for the Black population, and 5% for the Hispanic Latino population. There was an undercount of the Alaska Native Americans on reservations. And then in the Asian community, depending on your disaggregated data, certain Asian communities were also undercounted. So what do you have then? Like what you have then is a community that is underrepresented, so it's harder to advocate for what you need, and you have a diminishment of resources. So it locks you into a vicious cycle of not being able to access resources or advocate for the resources you need as a community. So the Leadership Conference has been advocating for a fair and accurate census for a long time. Now, what are we worried about? Well, Denise actually gave us a handy list of a lot of the things already, which is funding for the Census Bureau. At this stage, as we move into the 2030 cycle, we should be seeing a steady escalation in the budget and appropriations for the Census Bureau. We are not seeing that. We're still hanging out at the level we had for 2023. That is deeply problematic in preparing for the 2030 census. Next year, we should see the 2026 census test. They gave it a snazzy name, but at least it's a name that reminds us of what's going on. And for that, we need to see, for instance, a lifting of the hiring freeze so that people can be hired to work on the 2026 census test. This is not to imply that we shouldn't see a lifting of the hiring freeze so that we can start seeing surveys be conducted properly, but I'm just giving a specific example where if we don't conduct those tests, you're left in a situation where you haven't tried out new technologies, new outreach methods. We did not see We only saw one test in the dress rehearsal for 2018. It was conducted in Providence, Rhode Island, and they canceled the rural test and they canceled the test on Native American reservations. And what did we see? We saw undercounts. Now, we know part of that was because of the pandemic, but we don't know what technologies and what methods would have been tested that might have helped blunt the effect of the pandemic. So I can go on from here, but I do want to uplift something Denise said, because I don't want to spend the whole time telling everyone all the things that worry me about the census and keep me up at night. But when we lost these advisory committees, what was happening there was not just like a getting rid of a free resource of expertise that people are there to give advice on. A lot of these people are deeply embedded in their communities, and it was a resource to understand what is necessary for being able to reach a fair and accurate census, in getting that complete census, in having that targeted outreach to historically and persistently undercounted communities. By getting rid of that, we're locking ourselves back into counting the easiest to count. And that's not where the issue is. Like, everyone here on this webinar are easy to count. That's not who I'm worried about. I'm worried about those communities that really need the representation and resources and that are left out. I do want to say we do have a resource. It's our roadmap to 2030 at censusroadmap.org. And there we list out all the steps that the Census Bureau should be taking at this time, and also that communities could be taking at this time. And pretty soon we'll be updating that with a tracker as to like where we are versus where we think we should be. Recognizing that we don't know everything going on behind the scenes, but we do know that normally we have a lot more transparency and visibility as to how the planning is going as we move towards 2030.
Great. Wow. Thank you so much, Mita. And is there a URL that we have that you'd like us to put in for that, or that's the work that's coming in terms of recommendations for action?
Oh, well, I saw that one of my colleagues from the Census Project, Mary Jo Mitchell, is here. She's probably like, why did you say my name out loud? But it would be wrong of me to not say that at this moment, we are strongly advocating for the appropriate level, robust level of appropriations for 2026 for the Census Bureau. And this is a key time to get that word out and advocate for that. Beyond that, I would say that if you are in an area where you are slated for a 2026 census test, and I'll find that link and put it in the chat after I'm speaking, you should be advocating with your on-the-ground officials and your census and your Congress people to say, like, we need these tests to happen. We want to see it happen because we want to see these methods tested out. And then, yeah, on the website, there are a whole bunch of other actions people can take if they really care about this, like starting to think about what does it mean to advocate within your state to make sure your state gives outreach dollars to communities to get this essential work done.
Great, thank you so much. Well, this is sort of taking us into the realm of action, which is a very important part of this discussion. And I'd really like to sort of come back to each of you in turn to talk about some of the work I know you all are doing to try to change what we're seeing now and respond to the moment. And Denise, maybe on this round we could sort of start with you. You're now involved in a lot of different efforts to monitor some of the changes that are happening in government data. You're collecting use cases on the value of government data. You're trying to, working to preserve data in other ways, as well as doing a lot of research, I know, with your colleagues into the legal basis for different kinds of data collections and how that might be leveraged. I wonder if you could just describe some of the projects you're involved with, and I think we have URLs we can put in the chat for those as well. But would love to hear about those projects, where you hope they will go, and what you think how they might serve as examples for other kinds of actions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say one of the best ways to protect the flow of data is to use the data and to be talking about the value that the data delivers. Many people who use federal data, and I'll count myself in that number. Back in the day, I did take it for granted. when you're using data, you just assume it's going to keep flowing, and you assume it'll be there like bridges in the internet and other essential infrastructure. So in my current role as a fellow at the Federation of American Scientists, I'm collecting stories about how federal data benefit American lives and livelihoods. And I'll just give you a few examples. One timely one is that police chiefs use National Crime Victimization Survey data, which is a collaboration between Bureau of Justice Statistics and the Census Bureau. They use that data so they can better protect survivors of underreported crimes like sexual assault and domestic violence. Business owners rebuilding after coastal flooding know how high to install their new HVAC, so it's resilient to future flooding because they can use NOAA's sea level rise data. Parents looking for an apartment can find one in a school district that has supportive special ed services because Zillow includes Department of Education civil rights data. And then a more wonky use case has to do with reducing American dependence on foreign nations for rare earth minerals. One way to do that is to foster innovation in America's new space economy. So companies that are planning for future mining missions on the moon, they are absolutely dependent on NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter data to understand where they would land that spacecraft. So we're collecting examples about how the American people, businesses, and American competitiveness benefit from specific federal data sets. And the operative word here is that it's specific. We're really at the point where it's a ground game about identifying the value of data set by data set. And you can find this work. Our MVP is at essentialdata.us, and I can put that in the chat.
We've just put it in.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. And the other key is centering the ultimate beneficiaries of the data, not necessarily like the researchers or the bureaucrats, but actual people and businesses who are benefiting from this. Another example is a friend of mine who's a service disabled veteran, and he built a successful AI company on federal data from NOAA and other federal agencies that enables first responders to more quickly deploy resources to save lives during emergencies. So the federal data is just such a national treasure, and I bet a lot of you have great stories about the impact of federal data. So please share them with us at essentialdata.us.
Terrific. Thank you, Denise. And I mean, just the examples you gave, it's such an incredible kind of variety and very, very strong use cases. I wonder if you could also just talk for a minute about the Data Index project, because I think one of the areas where I think there's a lot of confusion is even people who are quite familiar with federal data may not know exactly how it's authorized, what the kind of basis is in terms of congressional mandates, what the process is around information collection requests and so on. And I know you're doing work on that through the Data Index project. Wonder if you could just describe that briefly too.
Yeah, absolutely. So my colleague at Demographic Analytics Advisors, Chris Dick, has been pulling together a monitoring of the changes that are happening in one set of data sets. That's the forms and surveys that are subject to the Paperwork Reduction Act. And so they leave this digital trail when the collections are about ready to be changed. And why that is important is that the Evidence Act of 2018 specifically encourages data stewards inside of federal agencies to engage with the public, to identify priority data sets, and to better understand the value of the data that the agency is collecting. And there are these opportunities for public engagement that come up when a data set is being revised or it's due for to renew its information collection request status every 3 years. And that gives us an opportunity to respond to Federal Register notices, for example. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, for example, right now, the use of force data collected by the Department of Justice, there's a Federal Register notice out there right now, and they want to know why use of force data matters to the American people and why it's important for the Department of Justice to continue to collect this data. And so this is a great opportunity, if that's a data set that that you or your constituents use, to just chime in. It doesn't have to be a heavy lift when you respond to these Federal Register notices, but there are people on the other side who are listening and who need to understand the value of these data for the American people and why they're important for agencies to continue to collect them. So at dataindex.us, what is great about that resource is it's monitoring changes to federal data sets and in particular identifying windows of opportunity for constructive engagement with federal agencies.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And I think it's so important that this is a way of having a voice before the data is changed, right? Before all the things happen that we're concerned about. So it's, I think, incredibly important and good to know that there is a kind of formal mechanism for doing that. Steve, would love to, you've talked about this before, but just anything that you might want to add about what the American Statistical Association is doing to react to some of these changes and the kinds of actions you've been part of, activities you've been part of.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. So I've talked already about the monitoring that we're doing just to document it and have it in record so that we can then react to that. More generally, ASA advocacy is trying to communicate to the administration, and to Congress. And Denise has mentioned kind of the one way that right now I know of is effective is responding to the Federal Register notices, but otherwise trying to stop what is happening in terms of all the cuts we've discussed is really hard. So that turns to Congress, and they do have appropriations coming up. There's been some indications of the majority quietly speaking out and pushing back. And I think that's the best hope. But of course, besides direct communication with Congress, there's many other ways to influence Congress, which is just to communicate more broadly with your social networks, make sure people are aware, and communicate to the media. So I'll second what Denise already said of I'm really a generalist, right? I deal with the 13 federal statistical agencies. I'm not going to be able to say what survey X and agency Y, how the data are used, and that's where you all could come in. How do we figure out what those are? And I know Denise has mentioned a great resource from that. So identify the value and then communicate it. I also hope that you all are communicating with your congressional delegation, which has already been suggested. I want to elaborate a bit on the challenges there, and some challenges that fundamentally disadvantage the federal statistical agencies because they are a public good. As I already mentioned, they're supported by many but championed by few. That is really hard in the appropriations process because they will prioritize those that are championed. So from the start, we're kind of at a disadvantage. Because not many members of Congress are going to say, oh yeah, we need to really bring that up. They're taken as for granted. So they're also not going to be raised up. We've already mentioned the Census Project. They do great work, right? And around the other 12 federal statistical agencies, there's not a lot of advocacy. Mary Jo and I are part of Friends of NCHS, Friends of BLS, but that is all volunteer led. It's not as organized, and there's not a lot of advocacy around that. So we need that help. Another challenge in Congress that I'll mention is essentially political expediency. When legislation is happening that could affect a federal statistical agency, the staff do not have the time, resources, wherewithal, whatever, to say, oh, I wonder what the federal statistical community thinks about this. They just plow ahead, assuming it can look like all of the others. So there's lots of disadvantages that we need to take into account. And I think what this points to is we just need more people advocating for it and communicating to Congress. So I'll leave it at that, Joel.
No, thank you, Steve. That's great. And Mita would love to turn to you. I know you're working on an advocacy toolkit. I would also love to hear your thoughts. You and the Leadership Conference and the Urban Institute had a terrific conference in March on protecting and advancing race and ethnicity data collection in this environment. Love to hear your thoughts both on the advocacy toolkit and on that conference and what some of the insights were that came out of that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joel, for that. And that's where we met in person. And so grateful many times over for that. So wanted to flag, yes, absolutely. As a result of several conversations I've had recently, I've realized a lot of times when people are like, what can we do? Someone on the other end, like myself or Steve, will say, or Mary Jo Mitchell, whose name needs to be said multiple times, we'll say, call your congressperson, call your congressional delegation. And I feel like, that is just one of many things people can do. And that is not always what someone's comfortable doing, whether in an individual capacity and sometimes not able to do so in an organizational capacity. So what we're putting together is something that'll be more focused on census and the federal statistical system, on lifts that people can take, whether it's as a person, as an organization, as a member of an organization, where it ranges from things like Steve suggested, like, is it about expanding it to your social network? Is it about, in this day and age, thinking of a clever TikTok? Is it about writing a letter to the editor for your local paper such that they exist? Is it about hosting a webinar and making people understand the importance of data? And maybe these people will feel impelled and compelled to do something about it. So when Denise is collecting data stories, as are we under wearethedata.us, lots of people are collecting data stories, but there's a reason we're doing it. It's so that people can then use it to talk to a journalist, to tell a story on social media, to go to Congress. In terms of things, I know there's not a lot of time, so I'm just going to run through a few brief highlights of things we worked on together. And there are a few people here who were with us on that wonderful day. One of the things that I think we can do in this moment is look for continued improvement. So one thing we discussed was supporting alternative paths for developing new standards and promising standards on disability, SOGI, and additional race and ethnicity guidance. Disability data was not being well collected even prior to this administration. So there's work to be done there. We can look at capacity building and sharing information on policy issues, providing plain language guidance to people on data issues. And we can look to build and reinforce relationships with the private sector and professional service organizations, and increase trainings on those issues so that people are more aware of it, such as is happening today. And then really look at public education campaign concepts so that we center kitchen table topics like Denise was saying. And then really look at intersections like is happening here between big data and tech and AI and public data. And then really also one thing we haven't really gotten into today is like start surfacing that tension between data collection, data privacy, data confidentiality, and how do we navigate that thicket in a way that we are able to give that cohesive, coherent narrative to people as we look to engage them in this work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, Mita, great comments, great work, and all three of you, terrific work that you're all doing. We're going to go now to some Q&A. The way I would like to do this, just first fair warning to all panelists. I am going to come back at the very end and ask you to each say in about 30 seconds what gives you hope and what you hope that people will take away from this panel in terms of looking forward towards action and improving our situation. So you now have a full 9 minutes to think about that. But I did want to go to all of the terrific participants we have on this webinar. What I'd like to do is invite you to raise your hands if you have a question or a comment. If we don't get to you, then please put your question or comment in chat. We may be able to follow up afterwards. But let's start with Jeff Myers. I see your hand is up.
Sure. Thanks very much to the panelists, to Joel and to NAPA for convening this. My question is whether there may be an opportunity, perhaps even a necessity, to rebrand open data, because part of what I perceive, in fact, what I've heard over the last 45 minutes is we talk about individual data sets, individual beneficiaries, individual concerns, but we aren't doing so, I fear, in a way that might bring on, significant stakeholder supporters, like let's call them the Chamber of Commerce. And the background is my company helps run open data.gov for GSA. I conferred with a couple of colleagues in Nigeria, in India, in Finland, and we looked through kind of the implied users of data of each of the countries' open data websites. And what we found was surprising. A substantial portion of the implied uses were for commercial benefit, for companies to make strategy decisions. And if we were to say, hey, you know what, this is a big benefit and it cuts across all types of data, perhaps there could be additional stakeholders that might have a little better luck getting some of the attention and action from the administration. So my question is whether or not any of the panelists think that we could get some sort of other stakeholders that are not presently really part of the game to sign up and help.
Terrific, thank you. And Jeff, I'm sorry, I should have asked when you started, but do you want to just say a word about your work in your organization?
Sure. My work essentially is kind of advocating for open government on behalf of REI Systems and with our customers. Our customer at this point, of course, is GSA. We originated USA Spending, data.gov, performance.gov, IT-dashboard.gov. That's not all of our business, but we do care deeply about the success of open government and transparency and data. We really mostly provide the technology for whatever information the government wants to make available, which of course is perhaps not everything that consumers of that data might want.
Terrific, thank you so much. Okay, so great question on sort of rebranding open data. Anybody want to address that?
I'll just take a quick stab at that. Having come of age professionally during the heyday of open data, I think it is time to think about how to re-envision it and to talk more broadly about the value of data and how it's an essential asset and how it also needs to be, private and secure. And so balancing all of the attributes of a robust federal data infrastructure. And I also think that it would probably be useful to start articulating the different types of data because they are different. Like the data that we collect from satellites and sensors has very different characteristics than the data we collect from forms and surveys. Similarly, the data we collect for government accountability, like USA Spending and the data on procurements and the federal workforce and whatnot. And so really, starting to flesh out what the typology of data in the federal space is. I do want to mention something, though, is that having advocated for so long for open data and government transparency and accountability, the threat here is that the collections will literally stop. So like open data becomes irrelevant if we aren't even collecting the data anymore. And so that's a very different landscape than we've had before. And so that's another reason I think why it's probably time to evolve the concept of open data, and would love to have you in on those conversations.
Terrific, thank you. Mita, Steve, anything you would want to add to that? Great. Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much. Judy Brewer, I see your hand. If you'd like to just introduce yourself and ask a question.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, I'm Judy Brewer. I'm the former Assistant Director for Accessibility at Office of Science and Technology Policy. And currently I'm at UC Berkeley in the Information School and Public Policy School there, in a fellowship with Denise as well in one of her other hats. Just two quick things. One is, Mita, you had mentioned the dearth of federal collection of disability data. Indeed, as you may be aware, at the very end of the Biden-Harris administration, OSDP was able to publish, with lots of help from lots of federal agencies, the Federal Evidence Agenda on Disability. I dropped that, a link to that in the chat a little while ago. And I encourage people to look at that area because there's as much as there are gaps in other areas of data, there are extraordinary gaps in a well-structured collection of data on disability. And even in good times, it impedes our ability for policy progress. The second thing is I'm very interested to what extent people are working with friendly states to try to get them to do parallel collection efforts on some of the national data structures so that there could be some data collection during these times and also some capacity that continues to be built and informed by earlier national priorities and potentially available in case there's an opportunity to bring that back nationally again. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mita, do you want to address that or? Yeah.
Yeah, firstly, Judy, yes, thank you so much for dropping that resource. And of course, I know your name. And like I for all the things going on, I do view this as a wonderful moment, if you can say that, to take the opportunity to really start doing research on what better disability data collection could look like, because I think that really came up, starting in November 2023, about like how we don't really have the quality and the types of data collection on disability data that we need. Vis-a-vis the state aspect, I think it's a yes and. There, in my opinion, we're never going to be able to like knit together a network of states that's going to exactly be able to replicate what we have in the federal statistical data system right now. Like there's going to be pockets of states that don't do it. There's going to be lumpiness of data. It's never going to be able to be this. Like, we have an economies of scale at the national level that we're not going to be able to achieve. That said, the value in states doing it that can do it is huge. One, those states are then going to be able to use the data to design the programs that they need and will have the understanding of their population that other states will not have. Two, in law school, you would always talk about the laboratories of experimentation. Like, that's why we have this federated system. So that allows for the laboratories of experimentation of what should data collection look like, and being able to point, like, look, this state is doing it. Look at how great it is for this state. We should be able to replicate that on a national scale in order to have these data available to us. And then finally, I would just say, also, it's not just we should be able to do that, but if states get out ahead, then that actually allows for that, that shining light of like, this is what our future looks like, and let's aspire to that. I think when we're looking at, I'm going to go wonky for 2 seconds, when we're looking at things like the implementation of the new race and ethnicity standards that came out in the Biden administration, I just made Denise so happy, SPD 15. Like, if states get out ahead in implementing that, we then have a better chance of seeing it implemented at the federal level too, right? So like, there is a huge role to be played in that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. 2 great questions, great answers. And now I'm going to go around and then we'll wrap up and just ask each of you 30 seconds. What gives you hope for the future, and or what do you hope people who've seen this webinar take from it? Maybe we'll start with Steve, then Mita, and then Denise.
Thank you, Joel. Several things give me hope beyond like just the attention and the attendance at this webinar. Number one, there are efforts that are looking at the future. It's not necessarily all about how do we get the old system back, how can we take advantage of what's happening to try to address structural and other barriers. There's been lots of attention to the concerns around economic statistics, also the nation's report card. So that is promising. In the tea leaves, there could be some support for the federal statistical agencies. Project 2025, outside of the census, had some positive statements around federal statistics. The America First Policy Initiative just put out a brief that was pretty positive on the Bureau of Justice statistics. Some of the agencies have been less hard hit than their parent agencies. HHS layoffs didn't hit NCHS as bad. You're forcing me to try to be positive, Joel. So that's where I'm going. And I'll mention one more, which is just that our messaging can really resonate, right? Federal statistics help to make the government more efficient, the decisions better, the policy is better, our economy better. I mean, so many things. We can understand where we need attention and what's working and not. So I think our messaging is also can be an asset.
Very good. Thank you. Mita.
+1 on everything Steve said. Also, feel free to sign up at censusroadmap.org if you want updates on how to be involved on census issues. Share your data story at wearethedata.us, and reach out. I already put my email in the chat if you want to be engaged in any of the data preservation efforts that we're looking at going forward, coming out of the convening that we held. I also just want to give a quick shout out to the Data Rescue Project people that are here today, because they've done, humans work, God's work, whatever you want to call it. They're all here, and well, not all, but a lot of them are here, and support their work as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Denise?
Yep. So my one positive thing is that we have a very engaged citizenry. People are no longer taking federal data for granted. So now's the time to act. If you're using federal data, it's a good opportunity to also advocate for its continued existence.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Well, what a fantastic, I mean, these are difficult times, but this has been a fantastic conversation and just gives me hope having a chance to talk with all of you and all the remarkable people who are on this webinar. I've put my my own email in chat, joel@odenterprise.org. We at Code are very, very interested in following on this. Just say a word or two, and then Alan, turn it to you to close out. But want to thank you all for participating. I saw a few people who weren't able to join till the very end. Do not fear. We are recording this. We will be able to share recordings with folks who have registered, as well as, Alan, I think we should try to synthesize some of this incredibly robust chat discussion. We can work on that at Code and at least be able to share anonymously, but some of the main points that were made and also all the remarkable resources that have been posted there. So I just want to thank you all and thank you to Denise, Mita, Steve for just your incredible contributions and the work you do every day and for being part of this. And thanks to NAPA for making this possible. And Alan, if you'd like to close us out.
Joel, thank you. And it really was a very inspiring panel, which makes me think we need to do this again on this very, very topic. And maybe we can take all the resources and make a kind of a resource handbook as kind of a NAPA publication of sorts. So I'm all for that. I'd like to leave you with a thought that was written in 1980, The Cult of Ignorance. This was from Isaac Asimov, where he said, "There's a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there has always been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread weeding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge." We have a lot of work to do. That was 1980. So for all of those who are still on, look for part 2 of this discussion, maybe even a part 3. This is really important. So thank you all for being here. This has been recorded. Please share this with your colleagues. If you missed the beginning, take a look. This was a wonderful, wonderful panel that left us with actual action steps and resources. It doesn't get better than this. So thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.